I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. Hey, Steve.
Morning, Matt.
Good morning. You told me that you went over to Timmy's last night. Timmy was one of our guests early on in the show where he talked about his weepy. It's been, I don't know, 4 years.
Yeah.
4 years since he's been doing a Saturday meeting outside under a teepee that he built, and he had a barbecue. I was invited. Of course, I don't leave my house for a number of different reasons. And it reminded me around a great topic around being sober and socializing, having fun being sober. And that can really be a big challenge for people thinking about giving up alcohol. Well, as for me, thought that would be a great topic to talk about today, to help people who are thinking about getting sober but thinking, I can't do it because how am I going to do this sober?
Right. How are you going to go to all of those backyard barbecues with, every other cooler is, these days it used to be just beer, and now it's all kinds of different alcoholic drinks in cans and stuff like that. So how is that going to happen? First of all, if you're thinking about that and you think, oh, I can't do that, it's hard. Don't kid yourself. It's hard to do that, and it's really, really hard to envision how that looks and how you can still have a good time. But as we talked briefly, I was up there for a while, right? So Timmy started this meeting back in 2020, right before the pandemic. Right. Actually, I heard a story. Our buddy Dave Brown actually told a story about the start of that a little bit. And actually it started with Timmy's now wife, his then girlfriend, Emily, who was also a guest on our show. She was having a meeting on Saturday night with some of her friends. And our buddy Dave Brown went up there, and somebody had said to him, it was started to get cold. It was October-ish, and they were like, Tim, why don't you build a teepee? And then Timmy, being the real good alcoholic that he is, said, yeah, I can do that. And I was just showing this to some of my family because I told them I was going up there a lot of times. So anyway, so he has this big party because I think it started on the first Saturday in July. So every year he has an anniversary party. And yesterday, 74 people showed up for the party. And then he did the meeting afterwards. And there were, I think, 48 of us at the meeting. This is in somebody's yard, right? This is in somebody's yard.
On the side of a hill.
Right, on the side of a hill, So when you get there, and there was a band playing, 4 people in a band playing some music, which is the first time they did that. And when you look around, and when you come from where you and I came from, and matter of fact, a lot of people came from at this meeting. And just so you know, there was 4 or 5 people. We asked about anybody celebrating anniversaries, and there were 4 or 5 people that raised their hand and had X number of months, right? These are it wasn't all old timers. These were people who, were just trying to get this program. And for those people especially, I think it was great to see oh, wow, this is fun. Right? This is fun, and nobody's drinking alcohol. So it is hard to envision, but it's available out there if you're thinking about it and you're thinking, how am I going to do this?
That's such a good point. And another reason why you shouldn't do this alone.
Right.
You should do this with somebody who has some sobriety because it will guide you that way. I feel bad that I just didn't plan out my day where I could go to this thing. And I knew about it for a long time ahead. I'm surprised to hear there were that many people there. That's not what I had in my mind's eye.
Yeah.
That there would be that many people there. But it does show, it's great that there were newcomers there because it does show that you can have fun being sober, even in the woods in the middle of rural Simsbury, I guess. that it can be done. I continued to hang out back in 2001 when I tried to get sober by myself with people who still drank. And it was hard. I felt like I was outnumbered and that I was a sore thumb sticking out.
Yeah. So there was a meeting, right? That meeting happens, and that meeting happened yesterday after the party. And the topic was sort of a little bit what we're talking about here today, but the topic of the meeting that Tim led for us was fellowship. And we talked about how, and we exactly talked about it. And I was talking with one of the guys, Ryan, Big Ryan. We were sitting next to him, and I was saying, it took me a long time to figure this out. And I'm like, I realized today that when I sit in that environment, when I sit with those people, that I said I'm with my people. Like, I have found my clan, right? Like, these are the people that get me more than anybody else. Like, they understand it. And we talk about that, and some of that meeting, it was shared by several people, like how that means. Like, the fellowship gets us. Like, we get it. I can talk to another alcoholic, like somebody there who I didn't know. There's a lot of people I didn't know. Most of the people at this meeting I did not know, right? I mean, about a quarter of this meeting I knew somewhat or a lot or well. But there's somebody saying, like, listen, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be. We hear it all the time. We hear Timmy said, and it's not just unique to Timmy. I didn't want to be around people. You say it. You're not a social guy. But there's a fellowship, and there's a way that we take care of each other. And all of those people with a few months, that just like you said, like, they didn't come alone, right? Somebody brought them here, or somebody had brought them previously to this TP meeting, and they're like, wow, this is fun. This is interesting. I'm not in the church basement. I'm outside on a Saturday night enjoying this. And he regularly gets 20 to 30 people at his meeting nowadays because it's been known, right? People like going there. So listen, fun. You can have fun. And then there's a lot of talk about, and this wasn't me because I came into this program very much older. But a lot of people have come into this program very young and single, and they talk about that fellowship and that fun that they have. Ryan, matter of fact, who I just talked to, talks about going to Ron and Roll, and he said, something. When I was 12, Ron and Roll was cool, and then I turned 13, and it was no longer cool for me to go to Ron and Roll, right? Like the teenage thing. And he goes, and now here I was, 30 something. Going to Ron and Roll, having a blast with all my sober friends, So there's a lot of fun out there to be had and to celebrate sobriety without alcohol. And the other thing I notice when I go to parties today, which I didn't notice before because I was too busy drinking, is that not everybody drank. Like, even when I go to even I'm going to go to parties today that have alcohol, most people are drinking responsibly. Unless I go to a family party, then everybody's drinking hard, right? But for most normal people, you go there and they're having a beer or two, they're socializing. They're not standing by the keg or whatever they're doing like I did. They're not just guzzling, or they're not running back to their car to get the straight alcohol because they got to get there faster. Like, they're not doing that kind of stuff. They're just having social drinks. But you can do it all that without alcohol.
I think what's worth talking about is, first, the things you can do with other sober people. That makes it a lot easier. This is where belonging to a 12-step group is helpful because you can build your social network. There's going to be a lot of times you're with your family and you're outside of the recovery people. There are a lot of people in my life and in my family who could benefit from a 12-step group, but they choose not to. So I have to interact with those people, and that can be triggering for me. So now the thought is I got to go to a family gathering like a first communion or a baptism or a wedding without those sober people. Now what do I do? And this is just something that happened to me before. What tips do you, what has been your experience?
Yeah, my experience, it's not so hard for me that much anymore. Although I do go to less of those things, right? I see a lot of those things, and I'm talking about extended family. I have a lot of cousins who I'm very close to, and I watch a lot of their social gatherings, which all have to do with alcohol, right? All over social media, like it's all like whatever they're doing it with a drink in their hand. That's why I said, nobody's drinking hard unless I go to a family function. And this doesn't mean they're alcoholics. I'm not saying that, although there are several who could probably benefit from a program. But I am saying like everything they do revolves around alcohol. Like they wouldn't have a party without alcohol. So number one is I choose not to do a lot of that stuff today, right? And I'm okay with that, not doing a lot of that stuff. But when I do have to go, first of all, I never have to go alone, right? So if you believe in a higher power, right, one of the things is you always take your higher power with you. But I always have my phone with me, so I always have an alcoholic to call. Early on in sobriety, I did this, and I've always encouraged my sponsees to do this. Is that if you're going to something that you know is going to be challenging, number one, talk to another alcoholic before you get there. Like possibly, you're probably your sponsor, right? And number two, always understand that you could walk away and make a quick phone call, right? So that's how I handle those situations today. If I need to do that, and it doesn't typically happen anymore where I need to walk away. Listen, you and I talked about it. I didn't have a week ago today. I didn't have a really good day, and I probably could have used to walk away and make a phone call, and I didn't do it. It never entered my mind. It probably would have been helpful to me, but I didn't do it. But it's available. We always talk about we have these tools available, but we do have to use them. So that's how I do it today. Like I said, mostly. If I know it's going to be a shit show, number one, I don't go, or number two, I have a plan on getting out of there early, right? That's I mean, like usually the shit show starts a little bit later, like everybody's there. It happens after a few hours. So if I sort of know that's coming my way, I'm just like, all right, I'm going to go. Especially if it's a big gathering, people never remember when you leave, right? They don't remember who said goodbye, who didn't say goodbye. Like I see this happen all the time, the big line to say goodbye. Nobody remembers that. I know, because I've hosted big parties. I don't remember who said it. So when it's time to go, I go. And I don't have a lot of feelings, and I make sure that they know I'm grateful for being invited, all those type of things. But yeah, lots of different ways to handle that, right? There's different ways for different people to handle different situations, and that's where, like you said, that's where having a posse, a clan, whatever you want to call it. We talk about it all the time here. Having that group of people that you're part of can help direct you in how to handle those situations.
Having a plan is so important, and it's worth learning from us when we haven't done it right, because there's been a lot of times I've shared on here that I could have done this and I chose not to. This is especially important early in sobriety. Early in sobriety, I went to a graduation party for my niece, and there was tons of beer there. I was more sensitive to it at the time because I was only a few months sober. So I knew enough to bring my own drinks for me to drink. My daughter was a newborn, and I used my daughter as an excuse that I had to feed a bottle or I had to settle her down, and I could walk away when I was uncomfortable. My wife also encouraged me, bring your own car if you have to.
Right.
And if you need to leave, you need to leave. So I did things like that. And early on, unless you're with a bunch of sober people, you still have to interact with the world. Early on, you have a couple choices. You could choose not to go. That's an acceptable choice if that's the difference between I'm going to stay sober and I'm not going to stay sober.
Right.
Don't go. I have been to meetings where people have gotten yelled at by the group because they talked about, well, I went to visit my family. I'm newly sober, and there's always lots of booze there. And people will say, you shouldn't have gone. You're lucky you're still sober, but in this case, don't go. That's okay. If you piss somebody off, so be it. You get to live another day. Second thing is have a plan. Have an escape route. Have phone numbers. There have been so many times where I just was uncomfortable at a social gathering, and I called someone. Went to a minor league baseball game early on, and these stadiums now are just booze-soaked. I mean, they have whole sections where they're basically outdoor bars. It's hard to escape. So I called people at the game, and just going through the motion of calling somebody was enough for me. Later on, when you get some time under your belt, it becomes a little easier. It's always good to plan bringing your own drinks because you never know.
Yep.
I went to a baptism a few weeks back, and we went back to the person's house, I think at 10 or 11. And I think there were 3 coolers of booze for every 1 cooler of a soft drink.
Right.
I mean, it was, people were imbibing hard at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I mean that's out there, right? And I don't know if I shared it here, but I do a little volunteer work, and the woman who leads this whole program I'm volunteer for was talking about Mother's Day, and she went over her sisters, and it was like the same thing. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning, and her sister was like, "Oh, have a Bloody Mary," and this woman says, "Who? What? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Who drinks at 10 o'clock in the morning?" And I looked at her and I chuckled, and she doesn't know I'm in the program, and I'm like, plenty of people drink at 10 o'clock in the morning, right? I mean, that's that is part of it for a lot of people. And then that doesn't mean they're alcoholics. I'm not saying that. But that culture is out there, right? And just like you said, that culture is a lot of places. And listen, you said it. You always have to have a plan, right? At this party was one of our guys who goes to the Monday night party, Frank. Frank's from New Jersey, and Frank has an older grandmother who's not doing well, and he says, I have to go down and say goodbye to my grandmother. So we talked about that whole thing a little bit, and just like you were talking about with family, and Frank goes, "I'm not stopping to see my family." He says, because all they do is drink, and then they talk shit about each other, And this is the point, right? Frank is like, no, that I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be in that environment, so I'm not going to stop and see him. Those are the choices sometimes we got to make, right? Frank knows better. Like, no, I don't want to put myself. And Frank's got a few years sobriety, but he's not going to do it. He's making that decision. He's going to go down and see his grandmother. He's like, I'm going to go maybe see if he goes, I might try to hit a meeting. He's like, I'm really interested to see if any of the people I used to run with are now in AA. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you can find a meeting down,
It might
right.
be.
So those are the things that we need to think about. And again, it may be different. Your experience may be different. I have another friend who goes back to Pennsylvania, grew up in Pennsylvania. His dad and his sister lived there. And, his sister's been in and out of the rooms a little bit, and it's the same thing. Now, he does go back and see his family because that's important to him. And he's got some really good sobriety, and he does a lot of the stuff where I talked about. He'll call me, and we'll talk about it, right? And like, hey, I'm going to see my family. It's always a little, and I'm like, all right. And this is the other thing. He lets me know he's going to be there. So if all of a sudden I know he's visiting family and my phone rings and it's him, I need to pick up that phone, right? Like that, he may really need to talk to me. So that's the other thing, of letting people know. I would always tell people, listen, if you're going to a wedding you're uncomfortable, I'll make sure I'm available. Like I'll have my phone on. And I'll be there in case just knowing that sometimes, just knowing that a person is doing that, waiting for your phone call, for me was helpful and gave me relieved a lot of my anxiety, right? Like knowing that somebody could, right? So it's really important to do that type of work. And again, if you're really new, they sound complicated, like, oh, that's too much work. Like we get it, I get it. It's not as hard as you think, especially if you choose to go to a lot of these things with another alcoholic or a supportive spouse or girlfriend, it could be very, very helpful.
It's not hard. It just takes a little effort. Yeah. And it's important to do. Sometimes you need to get on a notebook and write down. This might seem a little extra, but you may have to get a notebook out and write down some things. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to ask them more about them. I'm going to bring whatever my favorite beverage is. I'm going to have a to-do list and do this. At 1 hour in, I'm going to call someone.
Right.
even if you don't have to use those things, at least you got a sheet of paper you could stick in your back pocket that you have something you can use to get through it. Sometimes you just need to do these things, and it may seem, well, why should I need a checklist to get through a social situation? You might need a checklist to get through a social situation. You have a problem with alcohol, so therefore you have to kind of learn how to redo things. It's not the case for me anymore. I can go 10 years sober. I can go to these things. It's not a problem.
Right.
One of those things that makes me feel good or gets me through it is I feel really good being able to walk around and not have to drink or not be bloated or feel gross like the other people there might. That's a very freeing feeling for me. So that gives me motivation. It's nice to be able to be the driver if I have to, although my wife doesn't drink basically at all. But it's a nice feeling of being free, to go socialize and feel free.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Especially, again, coming from where I came from, and I know you came from, it's like that was one of the biggest problems when I went to these events, because I had two sides to me. And one was like I worked hard we've talked about this and I've talked about it, to develop a public side of me. So if I went to an event, a family event, I didn't get fall down stupid drunk where I was leaving, like, and they're like, oh, I can't believe it. I didn't do that. So trust me, when I was drinking and I was going to these events, I wasn't free because I wasn't drinking the way I wanted to drink. I knew I had to get home because I still had work to do, all these things. Like, so I was always anxious and on edge. And now I go there and none of that's happening, right? So I am free to relax and talk to people and always available. You know, just one more thing I want to talk about, how this, you celebrate sobriety and you go with someone to a meeting, to an event. One of the guys, one of our buddies, Edson's, was at this party. His wife was at the party, and she left for whatever reason. She left earlier, and he came over and said, hey, can you give me a ride home? He's like, Karen said she'd come back and get me, but now it's probably an hour from their house to Timmy's house in Simsbury, right? Mm-hmm. They live 20 minutes east of me, and it's about a 30-something, 40-minute drive from me. So I'm like, no, I'll give you a ride home. Like, I'll give you a ride home. Like, yeah, it's 20 minutes out of my way, but I'm not going to make I know his wife. I'm like, I'm not going to make her come all the way back up here to pick you up. And the beautiful thing was I needed some, I've had some of my own shit going on, and I basically had a 45, 50-hour-minute ride home with a guy who's got 30-something years of sobriety and who knows me. Like, he's one of my guys.
Yep.
And we had a great ride home, and he was very helpful to me, helping me work through some of my own shit. So that's the beauty of this program, right? It's the beauty of working it. It's the beauty of trusting people. It's the beauty of saying yes.
Yeah. Oh, and Edson's such a good active listener too, that you can learn something. You can learn something from somebody like that. There is, in your area, you might have a sober fest. I haven't ever gone to a sober fest, and I have no idea in Connecticut when this is, where it is, all of that stuff. But there are a lot of sober events depending on where you are, especially if you're involved in a 12-step group. Consider going with that, with people you've met in a 12-step group. Those are there to kind of teach new people, here's how you do it. You have to practice this.
Yeah. There is a Soberfest in Connecticut, in our area. Connecticut is like one area, pretty much, and it's usually the first week of June, first or second week of June. They've had to move it, and for our Soberfest, it usually includes, it's a 3-day festival. It starts Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if you choose to, you can do some camping and stuff. It's a great...
Yeah, that's my problem right there,
me too.
Camping.
But you could go for the day. I've never gone to one either. I've never gone to one, but I know of it. And I know people who go it and they love it, and it's a great way. It's a great way to go and check it out. And you don't have to camp. You can go there for the day. Usually, like I said, it's a campground. A lot of times there's a lake, and you get to, you can get to do some swimming. And what you do, you get to interact with families, right? This is what happens. Not only people in a meeting, which are mostly individuals, you start to interact with families who are on the same journey as you. And you start to see like how they're doing it, right? And that's how we learn. That's how I learn. I watch other people, like how they're doing it, and I look at it and go, well, maybe that'll work for me, or maybe that I look at it and go, okay, that won't work for me, but it's a great thing. The other thing that we have, again, where we live, there's lots of activities. There's typically a picnic, late summer picnic, and actually there's several. There's a recovery club, a few towns on the other side of the river, Connecticut River. They always do a 4th of July picnic, right? So for people, I know a lot of people, they didn't have anywhere to go 4th of July. They don't have that family. They're at this picnic, right? Sponsored by this, by the Recovery Club. We have a club too that does a picnic like late summer at a town, at a park in Manchester where I live. There's lots of opportunity to interact with people who aren't drinking, and it's safe. Like, I didn't worry about at Tim's party yesterday of ever opening up a cooler and picking the wrong drink. Never, right? It wasn't part of the problem. I would open it up. It was mostly water. There was a couple other things, but I wasn't thinking, oh, is this can an alcohol? Do I have to read the ingredients of this can? No, I didn't have to do that. That's a nice feeling. That's a nice way to have a party.
My biggest fear now of going to sober gatherings and going into the soft drink container or cooler is I'm going to find the Walmart version of the soft drink I like. That literally is my greatest fear. I see that and I'm ready to flip a lid because I don't Dr. Wright or whatever right. It is. That literally that's my biggest fear. And I feel so good in my sobriety, I probably could camp now without drinking. And not because of peer pressure, but because of how miserable I would be being outside all night. Yeah. I'm a snob. I camp at a Hilton. That's where I would prefer to be.
You and my wife do that well. I like being outside. I like camping. And I don't do it enough. I was just talking about.
Never my thing.
I was just talking to my wife about it's something I probably got to do. My wife has no interest in it. It's probably something I got to do. Like, I probably have to go out and sleep in a tent somewhere just so I can get that once in a while because I do enjoy it. I like being outside. I like waking up. And I did it my whole life until I got married to my wife, and she didn't want anything to do with it. So basically, I stopped doing it unless I'm doing some hiking or something. John and I once in a while will go grab a tent site and go up and hike the mountains of New Hampshire. So we're close by, but that's pretty much it these days. But it's fun for those. If you like to do it, then it's great. I was invited. I was at this party, and I was invited by a guy who apparently there's this guy he knows, and I didn't even ask him if it was sober, but I think it probably is a sober gathering. Who rented some type of? He paid like $5,000 to rent some type of lodge up in New Hampshire, and for $168, you go for 2 nights. And you get all the meals, you get all the food you want, and then you could hike. Like, it's going to be a whole bunch of different people, and you just do your own thing. You could hike Mount Washington, or you could do a smaller hike or whatever. And I'm going to check it out. I'm going to look at the dates. If the dates work for me, I'm going to probably say, yeah, let's go. I'm going to probably go up with this guy and just hang out and see what it's all about.
Love to hear from you of what your experience is socializing sober. Is it easy? Is it not? When did the struggle end? Are you wrong and you like camping? Love to hear about that as well. You can reach us, Matt at SoberFriendsPod.com, Instagram at SoberFriendsPod. All right, Steve, go do something social and keep the plug in the jug.
Yeah, I actually think I'm going to leave here. I got a couple things to do. We had a big house full of people, but there's a 10 o'clock meeting up the street from me, and I think that's where I'm headed this morning. It's like, I'm going to go hit a 10 o'clock meeting, and it's a speaker meeting. I don't have to do any work. Sit there, see a few people, and be a good way to just plug it in after a long week for me.
Absolutely.
All right, Matt.
All right. Well, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
you made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.